Hi guys, and this will be a part two, where I left off with the Amber Alert, and I'm not going to go too far into that. So I'm certainly not an expert. So please, educate yourself, get some good sources. This is my lived experience, so please talk to professionals. Certainly earlier the better. And I want to be one of those positive voices, certainly for my community and the kids in my family growing up, and certainly the adults. Because it wasn't believed, it was put down. Some people knew, but many of my older male cousins, attractive, talented, funny, guys that, I really cared about, and yet they had these problems, they had these issues, and certainly it was normalized. Most of them dealt with alcoholism, relationship problems, drugs, violence, and it stayed with me throughout my life, and most of them passed young. And certainly their parents weren't a lot of help either, because some of this stuff was encouraged. Incest is best. And that's pretty shocking to look at nowadays, but certainly, and others know this sort of like, I want to try to sit up straighter too. Yoga is good for that too, your posture. But certainly, when things are normalized, it sort of operates in a kind of fog. So it's always there, but you just don't quite name it. You don't have the language for it. And certainly when you're a child and people are telling you, excuse me, this stuff is okay, or we're just not going to talk about it, or it's just getting fresh, which I was told with my best friend and I. We had conversations about this because her brother was inappropriate with her also, and he was inappropriate with me. So I had said no, but then he sort of, he tried some things with me. I said no. And certainly the grudge that he got him and the other cousins, it's my half family, and his friends to harass me repeatedly. So this went on throughout my teenage years. And certainly my ex-husband was involved because he had family where we moved to in Fort Johnson. So all these people knew me, and it continued. And I was just 14 years old. My best friend at the time and cousin had gotten pregnant at 16, which was, it was a big change. We were kids. We were still riding bikes and eating ice cream. And she moved into this other village close by and met her boyfriend, and of course a bunch of older guys. And certainly him and his friends were often inappropriate. There were very few that weren't. With trying to have sex and do this kind of stuff. So it's getting into good touch and bad touch. And certainly there are people, excuse me, it's very hot. Certainly, hope you guys are staying cool. I have this little fan, but sometimes it just doesn't do as good a job. What I'm trying to say is certainly we knew this stuff was wrong, but it was sort of normalized. It was sort of like if you could get away with it. And certainly we see this with the whole Trump and Epstein sort of gray area. And oftentimes you see people getting in trouble nowadays, but it's really not. It's not into the children area, but it's that gray area when a girl, certainly then we had the whole teen industry. There was this whole, I can remember my cousin buying these big jugs of Bonnie Bell. It's kind of funny now, but when you think about it, it's really not. The Bonnie Bell, the Love's Baby Soft, there was this whole teen industry surrounding this stuff too. So certainly if you were 14 and you look 16, I can remember a lot of girls were buying this stuff. I wasn't really quite into it then. I was playing softball, I was riding my bike. We were involved in Explorer Posts, and here my friend is pregnant. And involved with these older guys. They got into drugs, and so certainly that was a big part of the pressure too. So keeping track of what your kids are up to is important. And certainly what went on after that was this sort of inappropriateness from this group, and it continued. And it continued certainly throughout my teen years, when I went to college, and when I came home. So it's good we're having these conversations now, and I want the kids growing up now that I don't see, because they're still playing these games, a lot of these adults, things that were normalized, that were covered up. You were bullied for it if you did say no, if you didn't get involved in some of this stuff. You were sexually harassed once you got a little older. The abuse became more targeted because oftentimes these guys would have a revenge or a grudge And certainly it's about power and exploitation. This idea, you're a whore, you're a prostitute, you're not hanging out with these guys, you're not doing what they want, my cousin was, oh, they like me better. Well, certainly when you're putting out, yeah, they're going to like you better. And so certainly that was a big part of it. And certainly my mother was no help with this. She wasn't very supportive. She certainly involved herself with some of this, one of those competitive moms that, is kind of befriending your supposed friends and hanging out with guys that, are supposedly your friends. This was before the whole MILF thing, which, that's a whole other video. So I just wanted to touch base on those themes for today. Certainly, shout out to people that are yoga instructors. I think it's a great way to get back in touch with your body, certainly with trauma, certainly when you've been through some of this stuff, there's a lot of shame surrounding this stuff, and yoga will certainly help you get back in touch with your body. I didn't do very well. I've put on a lot of weight. This is the heaviest I've been, and we're talking about pedophilia or MAPS, or this gray area with teen dating. And even this goes back further. When I was a little kid, my mother's boyfriends were inappropriate. These were father figures. So oftentimes a woman that is divorced or seeing men or have these men around, and you're just a little kid. And it still continues, the harassment from my half family with these men. And certainly we have problems with just about all of them. Everybody needs to take stock now. What side are you on? It's either love or hate, because it's very hateful to do this to a child. And certainly it's hateful. Certainly when I started working professionally, the sexual harassment, the power dynamics, follows you around. So it's good. It's refreshing that we are talking about this stuff and we are taking steps to correct it. And the people that have been normalizing this and doing this inappropriate stuff for a long time are going to be held accountable, or they're the ones that need, as Dominique Pellicotte says, they need to be holding the shame, because the victims aren't going to do that anymore. And with all this talk about the Epstein and Trump cases, there's very little about the victims. And certainly I've been carrying this stuff for a long time, and it doesn't get better. It gets worse and worse and worse. And even some of the people that were involved inappropriately with me have passed away, and their family members continue targeting me, harassing me. I still didn't get my security back from this other apartment. They continue to harass me each place I go. So we'll continue to touch base on that. But we're moving forward with some of this other stuff, and taking care of your body again, and getting in touch with feeling good about yourself. And for a long time I couldn't do that because I was dealing with such heaviness and shock and trauma from what they had done recently. So it doesn't get better. It's better to address it early on. Certainly they told us years ago, bullying, just ignore it. And I certainly did that all my life, but it gets worse and worse. And right up until my cousin passed away, my one male cousin, he moved around the corner from me, and my ex-husband knew, and he continued to cause trouble at the gym. So the sexual harassment just doesn't stop. And these were my family members. So we'll talk more. Be safe, guys.